Aerial spraying of chemicals over farms and forests began small, but it has now grown into a massive campaign that showers toxic chemicals from the skies. However, they don't just harm insects, they harm plants, animals, and even people. One of the biggest campaigns of the 1950s was aimed at controlling the gypsy moth in the northeastern United States. This moth, native to Europe, had been present in the US for nearly 100 years without causing severe problems. Nevertheless, the government decided to spray millions of acres with DDT in an effort to eradicate the moth. The results were devastating. The spraying killed not only the gypsy moths but also fish, birds, pets, and other wildlife. People living in sprayed areas complained about the destruction, but their concerns were largely ignored. The harmful effects didn't stop there. Milk from cows that grazed in sprayed fields was found to be contaminated with DDT, a dangerous pesticide. Vegetables and fruits grown in sprayed areas also carried illegal amounts of pesticide residue, making them unsafe to eat. In 1957, residents of Long Island, New York, tried to stop the spraying through legal action, but they were unsuccessful. Planes continued to spray DDT over homes, farms, and schools, causing damage to crops, livestock, and wildlife. By 1959, the program was reduced, but the gypsy moth population reappeared, showing that the expensive and harmful spraying had accomplished little. Another disastrous campaign began in the South, targeting the fire ant. The fire ant had been present in the US for about 40 years, but suddenly it was portrayed as a major threat. The government launched a massive campaign to eradicate the ants using toxic chemicals like dieldrin and heptachlor, far more dangerous than DDT. The results were once again disastrous. Wildlife in treated areas, including birds, quail, and raccoons, died in large numbers. Livestock, pets, and even people were affected by the chemicals. In some areas, quail and songbirds were nearly wiped out. The chemicals even contaminated the soil, affecting earthworms and other organisms. Despite all this destruction, the fire ant population remained unaffected. The campaign against the fire ant, like the gypsy moth program, was expensive and ineffective. Cheaper, safer alternatives, like treating individual ant mounds, existed but were ignored in favor of broad, harmful spraying. The failure of these programs highlights the dangers of indiscriminately spraying toxic chemicals without understanding their full impact on the environment and human health. The contamination of our world isn't just due to mass spraying. Many of us are exposed to harmful chemicals in smaller doses every day, from birth to death. These constant exposures build up in our bodies, causing long-term harm. People often don't realize they are surrounded by dangerous materials because these chemicals are marketed as safe and easy to use. In stores, deadly chemicals are sold alongside everyday items like food and cleaning products. There are insecticides that can be dangerous even if handled carelessly, yet warnings are often hidden in small print. For example, the insecticide chlordane is used in homes, even though it poses serious health risks. Some common household items, such as shelf paper, clothing sprays, and garden products, contain highly toxic substances like DDT, dieldrin, and lindane. These chemicals are used without much thought, and often without people realizing the risks involved. In gardens and homes, people use pesticides to control insects and weeds. Devices attached to hoses allow chemicals to be sprayed across lawns, but this can lead to dangerous contamination of drinking water. Even gardening equipment like lawnmowers now comes with attachments that spread pesticides, increasing exposure to harmful substances. Food contamination is another serious issue. Pesticide residues can be found on fruits, vegetables, and other foods, even after washing. Meats and dairy products tend to carry the highest levels of pesticide residues because the chemicals accumulate in animal fat. Although regulations exist to limit pesticide levels in food, these rules are not always followed, and enforcement is weak. Many foods contain pesticide levels that exceed safety limits, and consumers often have no way of knowing how much poison they are consuming. Farmers often misuse pesticides, applying them in higher doses than recommended or using multiple chemicals on the same crops. This results in even more contamination. Packaged foods in warehouses are also exposed to repeated pesticide treatments, further increasing the risk of contamination. The current system of regulating pesticide use and monitoring food safety is flawed. The Food and Drug Administration, FDA, has too few inspectors to properly check food for dangerous levels of pesticides. In many cases, less than 1% of the food supply is tested, meaning that most contaminated food slips through unnoticed. A long-term solution is needed to reduce the use of toxic chemicals in farming and everyday life. Safer, less harmful alternatives already exist, such as natural pesticides derived from plants. Educating the public about the dangers of these chemicals and encouraging the use of safer alternatives is crucial. We must move away from dangerous pesticides and adopt safer methods of pest control to protect our health and the environment. In the past, humanity feared diseases like smallpox and cholera, but modern medicine and sanitation have greatly reduced these threats. Today, our biggest health risks come from the harmful chemicals we have introduced into our environment. These chemicals, including pesticides, have contaminated our air, water, soil, and food, creating long-term dangers that are hard to detect but impossible to ignore. Pesticides now pollute the world around us, and humans are not immune to their effects. Even small amounts of these chemicals can accumulate in our bodies over time, leading to serious health issues. While large exposures may cause immediate illness, the more concerning problem is the delayed effects from absorbing small, invisible amounts of chemicals over a lifetime. The pesticides we use can harm the environment, killing insects, birds, and fish. But they also harm our bodies. For example, chemicals that damage the liver weaken its ability to protect us from poisons. The liver is essential for detoxifying harmful substances, but pesticides reduce its effectiveness, making us more vulnerable to disease. The rise in liver diseases like hepatitis and cirrhosis may be linked to this widespread exposure to liver-damaging chemicals. Pesticides also affect our nervous systems, causing symptoms like headaches, tremors, and even convulsions. Some people who have been exposed to DDT, for example, report extreme tiredness, irritability, and muscle aches. These chemicals don't just cause short-term effects, they can lead to lasting damage, including memory loss, insomnia, and even mental illness. In severe cases, people have developed paralysis or long-term neurological problems after exposure to certain pesticides. The effects of these chemicals are not always immediate, and some people are more sensitive than others. Children, women, and people with certain health conditions are especially vulnerable. Sensitivity to chemicals can develop over time, meaning that people who are exposed to small amounts repeatedly may become more susceptible to their harmful effects. The problem is even more complicated because we are often exposed to many different chemicals at once. These chemicals can interact with each other in unpredictable ways, making their combined effects even more dangerous. For example, chemicals that affect the liver can make the body more sensitive to pesticides, leading to more severe poisoning. The damage caused by these chemicals is a heavy price to pay for controlling pests. We must reconsider how we use pesticides and find safer alternatives to protect both our health and the environment. Understanding how chemicals affect life requires looking closely at the smallest units of the body, our cells. Cells produce the energy that keeps us alive through a complex process of chemical reactions, known as oxidation, which takes place in tiny structures within the cell called mitochondria. These mitochondria are like the powerhouses of the cell, where fuel from the body is broken down to release energy. This energy is stored in a molecule called ATP, which the cell uses to power everything from muscle movements to nerve impulses. Chemicals used in pesticides can disrupt this energy-producing process in dangerous ways. Some chemicals, like DDT, can block the enzymes that control oxidation, while others can uncouple the process, meaning energy is wasted instead of being used. When the oxidation process is disrupted, cells can't produce the energy they need, leading to weakness, failure of vital functions, and even death. These harmful effects are not limited to animals or humans. In birds, for example, exposure to pesticides like DDT can result in their eggs failing to hatch. The chemicals interfere with the energy supply needed for the development of embryos, leading to lifeless eggs. Scientists have found large amounts of DDT in bird eggs, especially in species like robins, whose populations have been devastated by pesticide use. The same processes that pesticides disrupt in birds also occur in humans. Chemicals that stop the production of ATP can have severe consequences, including birth defects, developmental problems, and cancer. These effects are not just a risk to individual people or animals but also to future generations. Chemicals that interfere with cell division and genetic material can cause mutations that may be passed on, altering the genetic blueprint of entire species. As we continue to use pesticides and other toxic chemicals, we are risking the health of not only ourselves but also our children and future generations. The damage done to cells and genes by these chemicals could lead to serious long-term consequences, making it crucial to reconsider how we use and regulate them.